Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Krishna Krishna Jasodanandana Raja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Shutarashutta Shri Shimari Savangri Sesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Rajagranta Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaura Pranandi All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Gauranga Gauranga. Om Akyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Savarantikam Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyareva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadara Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 40. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. There were many great saintly kings who were very expert in performing sacrificial rituals and very competent in conquering other kingdoms. Yet despite their power, they could not attain the loving service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is because those great kings could not even conquer the false consciousness of, I am this body, and this is my property. Thus, they simply created enmity with rival kings, fought with them, and died, without having discharged life's real mission. Purport: the real mission of life for the conditioned soul is to reestablish the forgotten relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engage in devotional service so that he may revive Krishna consciousness after giving up the body. One doesn't have to give up his occupation as a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or whatever. In any position while discharging his prescribed duty, one can develop Krishna consciousness simply by associating with devotees who are representatives of Krishna and who can teach this science. Regretfully, the big politicians and leaders in the material world simply create enmity and are not interested in spiritual advancement. Material advancement may be very pleasing to an ordinary man, but ultimately he is defeated because he identifies himself with the material body and considers everything related to it to be his property. This is ignorance. Actually, nothing belongs to him, not even the body. By one's karma, one gets a particular body, and if he does not utilize his body to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all his activities are frustrated. The real purpose of life is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Ata pumbhir dvijashreshta vranashrama vibhagashaha swanushti tasya dharmasya samsiddhir haritoshanam. It really doesn't matter what activity a man engages in. If he can simply satisfy the Supreme Lord, his life is successful. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So here is mentioned that there were many saintly kings, Raja Rishya, Raja Rishis. Raja Rishi means saintly kings. Saintly kings were the ones entrusted to continue on the parampara. Evam parampara praptam imam rajashayo vidu. Krishna says that he spoke this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, this in chapter 4. He spoke this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita in a line of saintly kings. Generally, he spoke to saintly kings. He didn't speak to sages. He mostly spoke to saintly kings because they were the heads of society and they can actually, how you say, not influence, more like force. How you say, put into existence the principles laid out in the Bhagavad Gita or given by the sages. They would, what's the word I'm looking for? They would not apply, establish. That's a good word. They would establish the practical line of work and see to it that everyone in the society would follow it. Therefore, Krishna generally appears in the family of Kshatriyas, and he also instructs the science of Bhagavad Gita, the saintly kings. That's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So the Raja Rishis, they're not ordinary living entities. As such, they are endowed with great wisdom. Therefore, they are qualified to lead all other wise persons. That was the standard. So here is mentioned about them, the saintly kings, and two qualities of theirs are specifically mentioned. They were expert in conquering others. Dig ipa jayuno yajvino. They were victorious in all the directions. And yajvino means they were expert in performing various Vedic sacrifices. So in other words, they were very qualified personalities. Still, however, they were not able to overcome the influence of the false consciousness that I am this body and this is my property. That's what's being mentioned here. On account of this inability or being unable to conquer that false understanding of self, of I and mine, then they simply created enmity with others who are also similarly identifying themselves with their bodies and something as their property. Enmity is created amongst living entities simply due to the bodily conception of life. There is no other source of enmity or animosity amongst living entities. It is simply due to the bodily concept of life. Someone thinks I'm black, someone thinks I'm white, so then enmity comes up on account of racism, for example. Someone thinks I'm man, someone thinks I'm woman, so sexism comes up on account of exploitation. Someone thinks I'm an American, someone thinks I'm Afghan, like that, then war comes up. In this way, all animosity can be traced simply to this one point, that false understanding of myself as the body, and this is mine. I remember being in high school and seeing a newscast about American plane being shot down because of flying in Chinese airspace. And then I always, as a child, I asked my mother. I said, "That's ridiculous. How they have property over the air, proprietorship over the air? It's air, like, do they set like boundaries so you can see? Okay, now I'm entering Chinese airspace. Like, how do you even know?" I thought the notion was quite ridiculous, but of course, anyone who identifies with I mind, they take that very seriously. Just as we take seriously our various insignificant property like a phone or a computer or something like that, if it comes up missing, we become very agitated, isn't it? Suppose you allow a devotee to use your property as such, your phone or computer, and then he says, "Prabhu, I'm sorry, I lost it." Then immediately the mind becomes very agitated, isn't it? It becomes very, how could you lose it? How could you be so irresponsible with other people's property? We don't think Christian's property, we think my property. The mind becomes immediately agitated. So similarly, just as we get agitated over that, someone's getting agitated that someone flew in my airspace and therefore shoot him down. And this way, all animosity amongst living entities just trace back to this one problem, namely the bodily concept of life. I am this body, and this is my property. So even though these personalities are greatly qualified, even they also suffer from similar disease of misconception. And therefore they create animosity amongst each other. And when there's animosity, where is there a time to pursue the goal of life? The actual purpose of human existence. As long as you're busy fighting, then there isn't time for pursuing the goal of life. That's just how it works. Therefore, sometimes devotees they go back and forth amongst ourselves over various petty issues. And what is a petty issue? Everything's a petty issue. Because the soul is minute, right? He's infinitesimal. We hear 1/10,000 the tip of the hair. So that means whatever we're fighting about must also be of similar proportion, right? Not really that significant at all. Although, due to the mind, as they say, the mind makes a mountain out of a molehill. I don't know if this is a proverbial saying. So we generally tend to the mind tends to blow everything out of proportion. Just like in the material world, I remember growing up, looking at someone is considered somewhat disrespectful in American culture. If you would get on the train, especially amongst black bodies, I grew up around black bodies, so I have this experience. If you look at someone immediately within 5 seconds, what the you looking at, and then and then animosity is created over such just by looking at someone, you can create a war. In the modern day, that's the age of Kali is like that. Or someone bumps up against you, and you feel slighted, or someone didn't say hi to you. You know they saw you. "Yeah, he looked right at me. He didn't say hi to me." And then the mind feels agitated by various such things. And then the mind, after it perceives such an event, tends to make a mountain out of a molehill, blows it out of proportion. It's actually a very insignificant event. Someone stepped on your foot, very insignificant event. But the mind will say, "Oh, you're going to let them, dish you like that?" The mind thinks in this way. We, just like having bad association growing up, if someone would tell like a your mama joke or something like that, something that was meant to be disrespectful, then sometimes you would see people would be able to like brush it off. It wasn't that big of a deal. But then their friends say, "Oh, you gonna let him punk you like that?" And then they would get him riled up so that he would want to do something about it. So the mind is just like such a bad friend that it tends to blow everything out of proportion. And that way we take all these insignificant events to be very serious, and the actual mission of life is aborted, and we just absorb our life in the constant waves of upheavals. Upheavals are like waves that are always coming to the shoreline. They never stop. So it's not that I'm just going to solve this issue and then I'll move on with my Krishna consciousness. After you solve one issue, here comes another wave of another issue. You solve that issue, here's another wave of another issue. And I think Prabhupada tells a story of a man who he had a gumshoe and he was running to the shoreline. And right when he would get to the shoreline, he would stop and go back. And then he was doing this several times. So another party was seeing him, And it's like, what is this guy doing? This is really weird. You can imagine seeing such a thing. Someone running to the shoreline, stopping, looking, coming back, running to the shoreline, stopping. So he came down and said, asked this man, what are you doing? He said, actually, I want to take a swim. And so the man said, second party says, so why don't you take a swim? What is the problem? He said, I'm waiting for the waves to stop coming. And once the waves stop coming, then I'll dive in and take a swim. So then it's like, what type of fool is this? There are such a thing as foolish persons. And such a fool is one who constantly absorbs his consciousness in the ever the incessant waves of upheavals that are coming one after another. One problem is solved, and then here comes another one. That problem is solved, here comes. They never stop. So at a certain point, someone has to make the decision that, okay, this is the nature of the mature world, but what is the actual purpose of my life? Is it to absorb myself in various upheavals, or is it something higher? So then, after ascertaining that there's something higher, what is that something higher? Samsiddhir Haritoshana. One should simply try to find out what is satisfying to Krishna and do that. Of course, that may be a little unique because we all have unique circumstances. So this verse is quoted in context of Varnashram. So whatever situation one is in, then one is to use that situation to satisfy Krishna, not to use his body mind for trying to solve the incessant upheavals in the material world, but rather to satisfy Krishna. The purpose is not to switch from brahmacharya ashram to grihastha ashram, then eventually become a sannyasi or something like that. Although we had that thought in the beginning, because to be a sannyasi, for example, was very glorious. Because you didn't even have to go for prasadam, it was brought to you in the first class plate. One that may be thinking in this way. And when I walk into the room, everyone offers obeisances. That's nice. And they call me Maharaj. That's also nice. And I get to carry this cool stick around. So one may think like that. So the purpose is to become a sannyasi. Or the purpose is to give up sannyas and become a grihastha. The purpose is, these are not the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to figure out how I can satisfy Krishna. That is simple purpose. So Prabhupada mentions that. Stane sita shrutikatam tanuvamanobir. That one need not change his social position. One need only surrender to Krishna and find out what satisfies him. That's all. And that way he can actually perfect his human form of life. In this way, the false ego, which is normally a great impediment to any one of us, can be surmounted just by using that false ego to satisfy Krishna. So someone is thinking, I am an artist. Someone is thinking, I am a scientist. Someone is thinking, I'm a philosopher. And these are all false designations of the soul. But such a designation can be used by using whatever designation you have to satisfy Krishna. Then that same designation can become the source of your liberation from the material world. Just like if you step on a thorn, then you can take out that thorn that you step on with another thorn. You just pull it out of your foot, and then you throw away both the thorns. Or another example is given if someone gets a disease of the stomach due to excessive drinking of milk, then the cure for that disease is another milk product, yogurt. So in this way, whatever is the source of our bondage, false egoistic concept, which is normally a source of bondage, can be used to actually free us from bondage if we use that conception to satisfy Krishna. Now, obviously it must be easier said than done, because these are great qualified personalities that the verse is speaking about, Raja Rishis. They're not just like ordinary persons. The word Rishi is a word that uses a person endowed with great wisdom. So obviously the practical application of this must be a little bit more challenging than it sounds. Everything Krishna consciousness sounds very easy. Like, this is so easy, I heard it all before. But when it comes to actually executing it, then it's a great challenge is there. So how do we overcome the challenge? So Prabhupada also has indicated this in the purport. He says, simply by associating with devotees who are representatives of Krishna and can teach this science. That was what was mentioned in the previous verse. If we can somehow, this strength, chit bala, spiritual strength, comes from the association and service of the spiritual master. That's how one gets spiritual strength. Otherwise, it's not actually possible to apply anything in Krishna consciousness. Although it's so easy, someone said, what do I have to do? Simply please Krishna. That's it. You don't have to do any yoga exercises, or I don't have to execute some. No, simply please Krishna. But such a concept is actually very high for a living entity, because he thinks in terms of I am I. I am this body. These are my property, and these things are meant for my enjoyment. So how does one get chit bala, spiritual strength? And that spiritual strength comes by the association of spiritual master, by association of sadhu. Then one can get spiritual strength. There's a nice verse in the seventh canto. I didn't think of this because this thought didn't come to my mind until just now. But I don't have the seventh canto on me. Seventh canto, 15th chapter verse that mentions this particular point that I'm making. Someone has a computer? Or it's 7:15, yeah, and I forget the verse number. I think it's like, yeah, I don't remember the verse number. I'll have to see it. Thanks. Okay, now let's see if I can figure this one out. 5, 6, 7. Okay, this is text. What chapter? Okay, if I have to do it in this way, there must be an efficient way of doing this. Okay. Content, introduction. 15. If you read all the verses while I'm looking for it, someone may find it before myself. It's like, sorry. This will be the last point. So it's a good verse, so it's nice to know these verses from the Bhagavatam. They're inspiring. Okay. This chapter has actually really many good verses. We can't go through all of them though. I think we've been. You see any cool verse yet? Anyone looking? It's about the spiritual master or the sadhus giving strength to hold the sword of knowledge. 26? No. What does it say? No, that's not it. Perhaps. Oh, I think I'm coming close now. Okay, I think I found it. I think this is it. Let me just double check. Yes, I found it. Okay. I couldn't remember the text. So it says here, this is verse number 1545. I knew it was in the 40s, but I couldn't remember. I'll just read the translation since it took so long to find it. It says here, as long as one has to accept the material body with its different parts and paraphernalia, which are not fully under one's control, one must have the lotus feet of his superiors, namely his spiritual master and the spiritual master's predecessors. By their mercy, one can sharpen the sword of knowledge, and with the power of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's mercy, one must then conquer the enemies mentioned above. There's a long list of bad qualities that we're attacked by, like lamentation, lust, anger, greed. It's a long list. Maybe 20 negative qualities are mentioned, which attacks living entities. So it's saying here that we need the mercy of our superiors, lotus feet. By their mercy, we can sharpen the sword of knowledge and then conquer over these enemies. In this way, the devotee should be able to merge into his own transcendental bliss, and then he may give up his body and resume his spiritual identity. This is a good summary of the whole purport today, actually. It'd be good to go through the Sanskrit, but I'll have to do it later. If I had known that I would make this point, I would have looked at this verse earlier before I came down. Understand? Giving up I and mine is not possible without surrender, sharanagati. I and mine is also the 10th offense to the holy name. To be, what does the 10th offense say? So what is the material attachment? The material attachment is actually to I and mine. That's actually what the verse, the Sanskrit specifically says. To maintain attachment to I and mine, even after understanding so many subjects on this matter. So that means that, if one doesn't give up the attachment to I and mine, then he commits nam-aparad. So how does one give up this nam-aparad? So then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says only by sharanagati, full surrender to Krishna, will this actually be possible. So even though one is endowed with wisdom, like these Rajarishis, it may still be challenging for them to surrender. So we can see it is not so easy to apply. But with the association of sadhus, all becomes possible. The impossible becomes possible by the association of sadhus who give spiritual strength. So these are the basic points here in the verse. Does anyone want to say anything or add anything? Ask any question? No? No.
You perhaps touched on this already, so I apologize if that's the case. But we have this I and mine, and we have to do something with it, like we have to engage it. So you're mentioning engaging the false ego in the service of Krishna. It is as simple as just approaching our authority and submitting ourselves and asking for some guidance, instruction.
I guess. Simple for the simple. I mean, yeah, that's one application of it. Asking our authorities how to use our various conditionings in the service of Krishna. Of course, then one has to also be attentive to his consciousness transformation. It's not that one should think simply because I'm engaged, everything is happening. One has to actually be attentive to what is happening. Otherwise, that's called niyamagraha. Niyamagraha is a great disease of practitioner devotees. It means to cling on to some rules or some principles of engagement without seeing if it's actually working on the consciousness or not. So one has to be attentive to transformation. Is it actually taking place? And if it's not, then one has to reevaluate either their approach or perhaps reevaluate the activity that they're doing. But yeah, it can be that simple. Asking what it is I can do, and then getting some engagement, and then taking it from there by being ever attentive to what's taking place within ourselves. Like that. Are there any other points of concern? Yeah.
I was reading the Mukunda Maharaj's book. So the Prabhupada wrote to Mukunda Maharaj. Mukunda, when he was in London, he had been invited to record on some album. So Prabhupada wanted him to stay in London and assist the devotees there. So Prabhupada told him, music is one of our items for chanting, but we are not musicians. We should always remember this fact. The best example is that we take advantage of the typewriting machine, but that does not mean that we are professional typists. So Mukunda reflected that I had always thought of myself as a musician, but now I felt with certainty that my real deeper identity was a servant of Krishna.
Yes.
I was going to ask you about people who identify with the body or their race or even as human beings, but if they identify with a religion, that's kind of beyond the body in a sense.
Identifying with the religion?
Yeah.
I don't know if it is, because a lot of the religions that people follow are intrinsically related to the culture that they were brought up in and so on.
Sometimes, yeah.
So it's just actually just an extended bodily concept. You know, if I'm born in the Middle East, then I'm a Muslim. If I'm born in India, then I'm a Hindu. You know, so it just becomes an extension of their bodily concept. And that way, religion, therefore Prabhupada would many times just say, this is not religion, this is Sanatan Dharma. So there's no question of religion. It's the eternal occupation of the soul that we're talking about here. It's beyond religion, race, sex, etc. Of course, it's hard to pitch that sell to people because for them, religion just means the rituals where you're worshiping God and so on. And so when people come and we try to pitch this to them that this is not religion, they find it hard to believe because it's kind of obvious it is religion. But it's actually not religion. It's Sanatan Dharma that we're talking about. So someone is, because there's so much variety in the material world. So the way the Sanatan Dharma manifests will be variegated in the material world. Bhaktivinoda Thakur discusses this point. So someone likes to worship God and with this mentality, with these various rituals, using these particular books. But the tendency for worshiping God is there. That's what we're talking about when we say Sanatan Dharma. It is intrinsic. Even for those who are worshiping the material world, they are also worshiping Krishna. Because someone may say, if eternal servitude to Krishna is the eternal identity of all souls, it's intrinsic, it can't be separated from them. But we look outside, there's so many people not serving Krishna. So it seems that it's not the eternal quality, but the fact is that everything is Krishna. So no one can be without service to Krishna. They're either serving Krishna indirectly through his Mahamaya energy, or they're serving Krishna directly through his internal potency. For Sadhaka is trying to connect to the internal potency by the order of spiritual master. But everyone is serving Krishna, so there's no question of religion. Religion is just an extended bodily concept for sure. Are there any other points that anyone wants to make? No? Okay, then. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.